Hello everybody and welcome to the Oregon coast. I am Jessica Henry Gray and I'm really happy to have you back with me today. Today I'm painting at Akola State Park in Oregon. I love this forest as you drive up to the beach. It just feels prehistoric, and so I just welcome you today. I am not opening up this video with my normal in-person introduction because when I got to the beach this morning here to paint, there were people scattered around just having peaceful, quiet mornings. I thought I didn't really want to interrupt them. So I just jump right in with my process today. So I have my setup as I normally do. I have an 8 by 13 canvas, just a gesso panel. And you'll notice that my palette looks a little bit different. I have a pill sorter as my place to hold my paints, and it works perfectly because I have 7 colors and there's 7 days. And I've also applied Velcro to the bottom of it. Self-adhesive Velcro wasn't enough. I had to do a little bit of JB Weld, which is like an epoxy, and then I screwed in the Velcro on my plastic container in place so that it didn't peel off at all. So when I'm done painting, I put the lid back on and I just put it away in my freezer, and the paint keeps almost indefinitely and my palette's pretty clean. So anyway, so that's a really nifty little trick. I cut the lids off and I put those back on just in a strip of Velcro, or a strip of duct tape. The lids are all held together. So I put those back on, rubber band the lid in place, and it's all set. I purposely cut them off because they would have flipped up onto my canvas while painting here, and that would have been annoying, so you can imagine. All right, so jumping into the painting, I didn't tone the canvas because the scene was so light and breezy, and I know you don't see it very well in the background. The camera tends to wash out values. So I just began with a white canvas and just sort of an inky mixture of burnt sienna and a little bit of blue, laying out my composition. Typically I do start with a thumbnail sketch, but again, I didn't have a lot of time this morning, and I know that this thumbnail sketches save you time, but I could see just straight ahead, I'm just going to simply put the rocks here and the water here. It's very, very simple, straightforward design. Now I'm beginning with my darkest darks. So I blocked in exactly where my objects are going to go, and then I took a dark paint, and it's fairly thin. It's not inky, soupy thin, but it's dark enough to leave a mark on my canvas. That's just ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I'm squinting down at my scene, and I'm painting only the areas where I see the darkest value in the scene. I can press a little lighter there to get a little bit lighter value, and you can wipe the brush off. Unfortunately, in these videos, you don't see how often I'm wiping my brush, but it's critical to your painting process to continually keep your brush clean, and so your colors don't get muddy. And it also is a good technique. You can clean it off and then lift paint around and move it around. So you can see I wiped most of the paint off my brush, and what was left on it I'm using as a lighter value to just block in the value that I see on that cliff in the distance. By no means is that cliff done being painted, but at least my values are established. Once you get your values established in your painting, it's much easier to move forward. Things will start to make more sense when you know where you're going with your extreme values. So I just put a little bit of white into my gray mixture here. Blue and brown make a nice black. It can also, by adding white, you make a nice gray. So I just did a little bit of that in here as I saw the values as the rocks came down towards the water. There was more atmosphere and gray gravel at the base of these cliffs. So that is the little bit of gray that I added in there. And I'm thinking about the angle and planes of this structure. So when I'm painting the beach, thinking about the plane of the wet packed sand using horizontal brush strokes. And then, of course, as my strokes go up the cliff, I'll use more vertical, choppy strokes going up there. Your brush strokes are very important to the process of your painting. It's so often we just get thinking about, oh, the color or values, and you forget about what's happening at the end of your brush. And it's critical that your brush strokes, every single one of them, you care about, you think about. And it might seem like it slows you down, but in the end, it will actually speed up your process a little more when you are taking your time to be more careful with every brush stroke. Now in painting the water, I laid out where my darker values are going to go. And at this point, when I squint down at that scene, I'm painting the dark aqua green colors. It was also something that I felt that the lighting was going to change dramatically for me, or I didn't know, whatever, so I grabbed these colors as I saw them. I know I normally when I start applying color, I begin with the sky and work my way to the foreground. In this context, I didn't expect that color to stay around, so when I saw it, I had to grab it. And that is a little bit of phthalo green, yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of white. Now I say these colors, but a lot of that depends on how much of those colors you grab. And so what you do is you just take little bits of those colors, set them on your palette mixing area, and then carefully mix together only what you need. Because when you grab your color out of your little bin or your pile, you don't know exactly how much you're going to need. So just take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and carefully paint the colors together. And then if you need more, you can grab more, but you haven't wasted the entire pile of paint. Okay, so a little bit of that aqua blue I'm putting in place throughout, just sporadically where I see it in the water. And like a puzzle, I begin laying down the pieces of the paint as I see them on the scene. And it starts to have a collective unity. So now I'm sort of looking at the sky. I mean, you can't tell from this video, but on the painting itself, that was a darker, stormy background there. You couldn't see the horizon. The ocean just sort of blended into the sky. The only thing that was slightly different in those shades of blue is that the sky had more blue in it, the storm clouds, and the water had a little bit more yellow ochre in it. So that was the only separation where you could see where the sky was and somewhere where the ocean began. I'm looking at where the horizon, as it were, interrupts the cliff, and so that's my intersection there where I'm adding it. And what I like about a diluted, fuzzied skyline is that you don't really see the straight, crisp horizon, and that makes it nicer too, so you don't have that sharp line that just sort of cuts your picture in half. So I got the sky mostly blocked in, and that was just gray. I added one little spot of sky blue peeking through, and I'm putting in a little bit thicker passage of the white for the clouds, but I'm blending those just with soft X's into the remaining gray. Little blue, little brown, into the white on my palette. And you can see how easy that works with the little pill container. And then with mostly a clean brush, I'm just softening where the horizon meets the water. I'm leaving that little triangle in between the cliff and the rocks white because I will be putting a wave splashing up there, and I just thought it would be best to leave it white underneath. Again, squinting down at the water, I'm looking to see where the gray of the water blends in with the aqua shades that I'd already put down. And so I'm taking that and just gently, without losing the integrity of the space of where the aqua colors are, and just letting those sort of marry together. Now in this passage here, again, it's just that gray color with the slightest bit of yellow ochre in it. And here when I was squinting down, there was a little bit more of a greenish tint from that reflection going deeper into the water. And I just loved that, so I grabbed it while I saw it. And then just adding a little bit more, softening the passages where the water touches the land, because you could see there was sort of this clean, almost a mist that rose up from the water, that I was trying to lose that edge where the water created a mist. Now where the water comes up to the sand, there's a hard-packed, shiny passage where it creates a shine on the sand. So I'm trying to work on some of that, where that transition from water to sand. It's very interesting the way that works. You have a dark area where it's wet, where it's picking up a reflection from the rocks, and then shiny wet. So I'm building up the layers of the water. So I start with the furthest away as I squint down at the scene, the simplest masses. And then over the top of that, I will add just gentle layers of white and sea foam as it builds up. All right, so starting to paint the distant hills, I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, a little blue, and some white in that distant one. By adding white to anything, you're going to create a cooler color. White will always cool down colors. So I'm just using my brush strokes in choppy, little chunky horizontal passages going down the edge of that cliff. I'm defining the contours of that form. Again, you can see I'm laying down short strokes to create that feeling of rock and cliff wall. The longer I looked at those rocks and the water, the darker they seemed to me. But you have to be careful when painting dark values in your scene. Be sure to always be looking around, because it's just sort of a phenomenon that happens when you look at something. Either it becomes much lighter if it's white, like snow or clouds, or if it's a darker value, it becomes very dark. So just make sure to keep looking around, jumping around, look at your whitest whites and your darkest darks in your scene. I started painting those rocks and I realized I didn't have my darkest darks painted. I had the value there, but I needed to have those a little bit more in place before I went back and painted something that seemed dark. So by having those anchors in, you're better able to determine the correct values of everything else in your scene. So this cliff here that is closer to us has more yellow ochre, more burnt sienna. It's richer, stronger contrast. You can see even just comparing the further cliff and this one up close, how dark the lines at the bottom are and how richer the color is. A little more sienna, a little more ochre. And I'm using a little stronger brush strokes, keeping that distant one softer. So there's that contrast of near and far. And that was really what I wanted to focus on in this painting. A plein air painting is not about painting a scene to photographic accuracy, but it's more about capturing the essence of a scene and those elements of the scene that you thought were interesting and or poetic, or maybe how you loved how the light moved, or the way it was just this. For example, in this case, I loved that sea foam back in the middle there, that mist that sprayed up from the water. So those are the things that I wanted to make sure I captured. So I had to get all my characters in place, my cliffs and the water and the rocks, and then I started to fine-tune the thing that it was that I really wanted to say. And I loved the way that the sand and the rocks were coming up to the rocks, and the way the water was just sort of doing this delicate little dance around these rocks. So that was my focus here. I was able to, in the last few minutes of this painting, just really concentrate on those things that were important to me. And I'm laying in the dark values of the wet packed sand. Over the top of this, I will lose some of this big broad strokes, but when I squinted down at that scene, I could see these two passages of these lines that came out. That one is closer to the reflection of the rock directly above it, and the other one was just the wet packed sand, probably from the larger cliff, creating a reflection in the sand. But I just softened them a little bit, allowing the splashes of the waves to sort of soften those edges so that they weren't like two big strong stripes on the painting. And then painting the sand. Sand is a lot grayer than we realize. It has more blue and white in it. It's tempting to look at sand and think, oh, it's burnt sienna and yellow ochre. But it's not as much. You have a lot more gray in it than it originally appears. I'm keeping my brush strokes long and smooth and feeling like water, those shines where the water and the sand meet. And I'm also thinking about waves. One thing I don't want to do here is get a tiny brush. I get one that's a little bit smaller, but I don't get really fussy with the details in this passage because I really want this to be a clean and simple painting. Adding a little bit of those waves that splash in the background up on that rock. And so I'm just carving those into the passage there. It was sort of a focal point in the painting. I just got there and those are the things you look at, like, wow, look at that big wave. So I wanted to get a little bit of that in the painting, and some of the water sort of cascading over the smaller rocks there in the foreground. So I do that. I just streak it a little bit, and I'm not afraid to use my finger to just sort of soften and blend and smooth things around. And then so taking that smaller brush and I'm working the water around each of the rocks and up the rocks. It's a lot of fun, and it's easy to get carried away on this passage, so be careful not to go nuts when you're doing water, because I have done it. It's like, oh, this is fun, and then before you know it, you think, okay, I killed it, it's too much. So just do a little bit, step back, do a little more, step back, see if it needs more. It oftentimes it doesn't need more. Remember, it's all about just saying those few things that were important, that were just key essential things. When you've said it, just stop and just look at it. All right, I'm just using a soft, light brush stroke to get some of those effects. All right, everybody, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today on this video. I hope if you enjoyed it, you like and subscribe, and I always appreciate your comments. Check out my links below, and I will see you next time. All right, everybody, bye-bye.